Good evening. My name is Frank Billingsley. I am the chair of the Florida Humanities Council. Welcome to, oh, thank you. We like that. Okay, so everyone that clapped, I'm going to ask you to join the Florida Humanities Council, and I'm going to tell you about that in just a moment. But I'm really excited about being here tonight. First of all, we've got two great mayors of Florida that call Tampa Bay home that are here with us tonight. I work for the mayor of Orlando, and I know how busy mayors are. And for both these mayors to be with us here tonight, I think it's just wonderful. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Tonight we're bringing back a program that lots of people are still talking about. It's a program that happened back in 2003 across Tampa Bay in St. Petersburg. And folks are still talking about that, and we've been meaning to for some time to bring this event to this side of the bay here in Tampa tonight. So we're excited that we're here in the city of Tampa talking about the two cities that anchor Tampa Bay. The Florida Humanities Council is the only organization in Florida that is really teaching and sharing the story of Florida and what we are as a state and the place that we call home. And we're all big believers that this is a wonderful state, a complex state, and a state where the better we understand the peoples, the history, and the places in Florida, the better we are set for the future. And that's why the work that we do is so important. We have events, hundreds of events throughout the state of Florida. Each year we have a very dynamic website that I'd invite everyone to look at, flahum.org. That's easy to remember. And get on that website or sign out some paperwork tonight to join us because we need support from Floridians. Tonight, I'd like to recognize some of our organizational partners who have helped make this program possible. The Florida Studies Center, whose director is here tonight. That's Gary Mormino, and we're going to hear from him in a while, as well as Ray Arsenault. So let's give them a round of applause. Another partner with us here tonight is the University of South Florida Libraries, whose dean is with us tonight, Bill Garrison. Let's give him an applause. And Director Mark Greenberg as well. So thank you for being our partner tonight. As I say, I live in Orlando, but I'm planning on a trip to Tampa to visit the Tampa Bay History Center, and they're one of our partners here tonight too. So let's welcome Curator Rodney Kite Powell. I hear great things about the History Center here. Next, I'd like to introduce the president, or recognize the president of this fantastic and beautiful historic club that we're in tonight, and that is Jose Orell. So Jose, thank you. We appreciate you hosting us here tonight. And I'd like to introduce and actually bring up to make a few remarks the executive director of the club. His name is Rick Duran. Rick, let's welcome Rick.
Well, I can tell you that Centro is honored to be able to host the second Tale of the Cities, and we really appreciate, and honor is a lesser word than really we can say. But thank you, Mayor Iorio, thank you, Mayor Baker, Dr. Arsenault, Dr. Mormino is hiding behind here in the wings. But I hope you enjoy yourselves. I think this promises to be a very, very exciting night for you. Thank you again for coming.
Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce someone that is very smart and very associated with the Florida Humanities Council for many years, and that is Dr. Gary Mormino. Gary, come out so that they can see who I'm talking about, but you probably all know Gary already, but Gary is, he's going to make you work for his appearance tonight. But Gary has long been associated with the Florida Humanities Council. He's a scholar, a speaker, and a teacher. And he's written a book called The Land of Sunshine, State of Dreams, A Social History of Modern Florida. And out of that wonderful book came a statewide documentary that was aired on every PBS station in Florida, and produced by our partners at WEDU, The Florida Dream, which is a wonderful story about the history of Florida since World War II. Gary earned his PhD in history from the University of North Carolina, and he is currently a professor of history and Director of the Florida Studies Program of the University of South Florida in St. Petersburg. Gary, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. What a great crowd. Who could have imagined that so many people would come out to hear two professors of history? I mean, this is, and we brought along two very tall friends. So there are too many people to introduce in the audience. I do understand the Tampa City Council is sitting under the chandelier, and there's a legend of Centro Asturiano that should the chandelier ever fall, Tampa and St. Petersburg would unite as one city. So this is the perfect setting for tonight's occasion. I think it's the most beautiful theater in the state of Florida. This was a mutual aid society. This was a mutual aid society, a clubhouse for Asturian immigrants from the province of Asturias in Spain. I vividly recall coming here in 1978, and an elderly man was repairing the seats there, and he told me several interesting facts about the theater. One, up here you can't see it, but there is an idiot box in front of Professor Arsenault, and it allows someone to prompt actors on the stage, and the acoustics are perfect here. Secondly, he told me there are three seats, each measured to the girth of the patron. There's a small, a medium, and a large, and congratulations, you may have chosen the small seat. And the best story is that in 1929, the Italian opera star Tito Schipa came to give a concert. It was sold out. At the end of the concert, he went up to the balcony windows, and there were so many people gathered outside hoping a few notes would waft across the windows. He perched on the ledge like Quasimodo and gave a free concert to the folks outside. You have to like that. And finally, this theater was the only Spanish language theater during the New Deal. This was part of the federal theater project during the New Deal. Appropriately, exactly 150 years ago, this week, Charles Dickens' novel, A Tale of Two Cities, was published in late April, early May 1859. And appropriately, this was one of the favorite novels that was read in the cigar factories of Ybor City. In fact, the novel, when I came here, was in the biblioteca just across the hall, and it's now in the USF library. Readers, the lectores in Ybor City, knew a good storyline, and nothing is better in a good storyline than a great rivalry. And so too, this is one of the great themes in history, rivalries. As was mentioned in 2003, Act 1 of Tale of Two Cities appeared in Tampa, or rather in St. Pete. But actually, in 50 years ago, is Leland Hawes here? Leland Hawes here tonight. Leland Hawes of the Tampa Tribune wrote an 8-part series entitled Tale of Two Cities. And Leland began that series with the following quotes. St. Petersburg, why, it's filled with snowbirds lounging around on green benches waiting to die and be buried. Tampa, wouldn't go near there. It's just like little Chicago. You could be shot waiting to cross the street. We thought Leland Hawes was a gentleman. But Dickens and Hawes understood the importance of rivalries. London and Paris, Tampa and St. Pete, San Francisco and Oakland. When asked why the 1906 earthquake devoured San Francisco but left Oakland intact, the humorist Bret Hart replied, "There are some things even the earth won't swallow." On that note, let me introduce the honored guest. Tampa Mayor Pam Iorio, after stints with the Hillsborough County Commission and the Supervisor of Elections Office, was elected mayor of Tampa in 2002. I might add, on a note of celebration, she recently celebrated her 50th anniversary just last week. So brava, Mayor Pam. St. Petersburg Mayor.
Birthday.
What a
She
gentleman.
still looks good, doesn't she?
Always a gentleman.
St. Petersburg Mayor Rick Baker, born in Chicago, raised in Miami, attended Brandon High School. Just think, you could be mayor of Brandon if we only knew where Brandon began and ended. But he was elected mayor of St. Petersburg in 2001, re-elected in 2005. Welcome, Mayor Baker. I should add that both mayors will soon be looking for a new job, since there's no such thing as tenure in mayoral politics. My tenured colleague, Ray Arsenault, holds the John Hope Franklin Professorship in Southern History at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. He founded the much lauded Florida Studies program there, and he has recently written 2 blockbuster books that you may have read about, Freedom Riders and The Sound of Freedom. Welcome, Professor Arsenault. Well, the format is very simple. I will ask 3 or 4 questions, and following that time, in about half an hour, we'll ask our 3 invited journalists to ask questions. So let the program begin. Question 1, looking back at the history of your respective cities, what mayor or political personality do you most admire? Mayor Iorio, would you please begin?
Great to be here. Thank you to the Florida Humanities Council and everyone for attending. Mayors, we've had some very colorful mayors, very interesting mayors. And for many years, mayors were elected for 1-year terms and 2-year terms. It wasn't really until modern times they got into 4-year terms. I can't really say there's one in particular that you can say this is one you really admire, but there's one that I think has been very interesting in Tampa's history, and that's Nick Nucio.
Yay.
You know, you just have to appreciate Nick Nucio. He came first with the county, and everything is stamped Nick Nucio. So as you're walking along streets or bridges, sidewalks, he had a stamp. And twice he was elected mayor, and again, he did a great deal with infrastructure. He was always, his focus was always public works. You know, he'd go home after lunch, he'd go home for lunch, and his wife would make lunch for whoever he brought over, and sometimes he would bring over 5 people, and sometimes he'd bring 20 over for lunch. And she never knew what to expect, and she always made a beautiful lunch for everyone. And then he would take a nap, something I wish that would be nice. I would like that. And then when he felt ready, he'd go back to the office. School children loved him. He was really a man of the people. He lost his race to Julian Lane. The Tribune hated him and did everything they could to defeat him anytime he ran. So he did lose to Julian Lane, then later beat Julian Lane, then later was beaten by Dick Greco. So he had a spotty career. He wasn't always successful, but he had a long and distinguished career, and he really cared about the average person in the city of Tampa. And he really cared about making public improvements that would last a lifetime. And I think he's one of our more memorable mayors.
Bravo.
I'd like to thank the Florida Humanities Council for putting this on. I think it's a great thing to do. I love history. I love, it's been, and I know Mayor Iorio and I have shared this, that knowing a bit about the history of our cities has helped an awful lot in deciding where to go from here. And so I'm thankful to be part of this. I would like to introduce my wife, Joyce, who's here. Joyce, say hi. We've only been married for 23 years. I'm not nearly old enough to be married for 50 years to anybody.
It only feels like 50 years to my husband.
I think that I'm kind of like Pam. I don't know that I could name a single mayor that would be the best. Al Lang, you'd have to say, was a pretty important guy. He back in the turn of the last century, he helped bring spring training to St. Pete and begin the baseball history in St. Petersburg. He was involved with all the folks putting together the waterfront park system, which has been so important to our city. And and just I think a very great mayor. But we've had a lot of great ones. A lot of them, some difficult times in the 30s and some difficult times in the 80s and 90s as well. So, but I think we have I think the most fun mayor was Frank Pulver. Frank Pulver was here back in the 20s and 30s, and he was called the Millionaire Bachelor Mayor. And it was during a period of time when we were really into promoting the city. And so Frank and a fellow named John Lodwick, who is the city's publicist, would always come up with these ideas on how to promote the city, get people to come to St. Pete. And one day, like John Lodwick, he would ask, well, where is the world championship for horseshoes? And people would say, I don't know. He'd say, well, okay, right here, we'll do it. And so we'd have the world championship for horseshoes and volleyball and lawn bowling, and thousands of people would come, and they just made it up. It was really cool. They did something called the Lodwick technique, where they would take tourist pictures on the waterfront with a fish or a pelican, and then they would send it to newspapers all over the Midwest and the Northeast, and with a caption, it would say, here's John and Mary Smith from Notown, Pennsylvania, enjoying St. Petersburg, Florida, where the sun shines all the time, and it's the most beautiful place. And they would send these dozens and dozens of these around, and all these newspapers started writing about St. Petersburg. My favorite one was Frank Pulver, though. Well, Frank took, Mayor Pulver, took a group of swimming suit women up to New York City, and he had them march down, I think it was Madison Avenue, in the winter, and stop traffic, and everybody started writing about these articles about St. Petersburg and all these beautiful women and all this. Well, my favorite thing that they did was called the Purity League. And the Purity League was an organization that they concocted, and it was, they decided, that first they got a lady that looked sufficiently grumpy to be head of the Purity League. And she started writing letters to people, to the newspaper and such, saying, we have this terrible problem in St. Petersburg about all of these beautiful women that have very small swimsuits, and it's just terrible for the morals of the city, and we need to stop that. And so Mayor Pulver decided he was going to do something about that, and so he decided he was going to appoint a bathing suit inspector for the city. And so he did a search, and he looked around, and he really looked far and wide, and he couldn't find really the right person, so he appointed himself the bathing suit inspector for the city. And they took a picture of a lady on the beach in a bathing suit, and the police chief standing by, and the lady from the Purity League looking grumpy, and Mayor Pulver with a ruler measuring the distance between the lady's knee and the swimsuit to see if it was within regulations for the city. And they took a picture of that, and then they sent it to newspapers all around the Midwest and Northeast with this canned article about this terrible problem in St. Petersburg, the conflict of all these beautiful women in very small swimsuits in St. Petersburg. Thousands of people came to our city back then. There are many, many other things that they concocted along the way, but I think Frank Pulver's got to be somebody, a mayor that you remember.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Well, I'd like to agree with Mayor Baker about Al Lang, certainly a wonderful character. And when we were setting up this evening's program, Gary and I went through the Rays schedule to make sure there was no Rays game tonight, because I'm such a baseball nut. So Al Lang, of course, deserves a lot of the credit, as Rick suggested, for the creation of the Grapefruit League, and he was the ambassador of baseball, and he was the author of the so-called green, the green law, where when they set up they weren't green benches to start. The kind of signature of the city were these benches that were put out in front of Noel Mitchell, who was another colorful mayor, in front of his real estate office, and they were purple and chartreuse and heliotrope and every color imaginable. And so Al Lang had enough of that, and he decided that in good baseball fashion, he wanted to make everything green. So they designated the size of the bench and the design and the color, and he was wonderful. And while actually mentioning that, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention David Fisher, who preceded Rick as mayor, and actually Rick was one of, I guess you were his campaign manager, weren't you? So Rick deserves certainly some credit for this as well, but when David Fisher was mayor in the 1990s, he led a kind of green revolution in the city, and if you remember what St. Petersburg was like 20 years ago, and you look at it now with the beautiful foliage and extraordinary kind of greening of the city, that started under Mayor Fisher's leadership. So he deserves a lot of credit for that and many other things.
Thank you. You know, I should have noted that, to me, what's extraordinary about this event tonight is that you have two mayors of large cities who are bona fide historians. Mayor Baker has written, Ray, you want to raise the book? Mangroves to Major League. And Mayor Iorio received her master's degree in history from USF and won a prize-winning article on her history of the white primary. So that's rather nice. I should add, by the way, that I had the fortunate opportunity as a young historian 30-something years ago to interview Nick Nuccio. And he would always put on a suit when I interviewed him. The suit had moth-eaten holes and food stains, and he was quite elderly at the time. And I'll never forget one of his lines. He said, "Gary, I just love concrete." And what he would do as county commissioner, if you wanted a driveway built or you wanted a park bench for your school, Cohn Brothers delivered it and repaired your driveway, but they would always stamp in, courtesy of Nick C. Nuccio, county commissioner. Those are, and even though he was born in Tampa, he very much sounded like an immigrant. He had a thick Italian accent, and he had a way of confusing the English language. He once, the press asked him whether Governor Hayden Burns was going to come through with a financial stimulus package, and he said, "Trust me, the governor has a soft spot in his head for Tampa." Question number 2. In your respective cities' checkered histories, whom do you regard as your favorite rogue? And kind of a two-part question. Why do you think Florida in general and Tampa Bay have been such favorite places for scoundrels and scalawags to come to? Mayor Baker, why don't you begin first?
We've not had anything but outstanding citizens in our city. I think Ray mentioned him. I'll go ahead and expand a little on it. Noel Mitchell. Noel Mitchell was another one of our great mayors in the city's history. He was one of the Knickerbocker boys that were selling the real estate, actually selling lots back during the boom. And he is the one that he put, I think it was an orange bench out in front of his real estate office, and kind of triggered the whole what became the green bench phenomenon. And he was quite a character. He decided in 1920 to run for mayor of St. Petersburg, and he's beginning his campaign, and I guess he was talking to his campaign folks, and he had an issue that he had to deal with because he had been institutionalized before he had decided to run for mayor. And they thought that might be a campaign problem. So he actually, this is a true story. Most of the stories are true that we'll tell. This one's close. I'll divert. Well, no, I won't. So he decided that he would bring his competency papers with him to all campaign events. And as he was campaigning, somebody would scream something out about him being institutionalized, and he would wave his papers to the crowd, and he would say, "I am the only candidate for mayor of St. Petersburg that has been proven not to be crazy." He was elected. He was elected in 1920, and he was in office, I think, almost a year before he was recalled from office. He was recalled something about a booze party at City Hall during Prohibition, I think it was, and that kind of crossed him the wrong way. He later ran for governor of Florida, And while he was running for governor, he would have this fella that would kind of hound him at all the campaigns, kind of bringing up the fact that he'd been recalled, and that would be a blemish upon him running for governor. And he finally stopped. He said, "Sir, my past may be dark, but my future is as white and pure as the God-given snow." He didn't make it to the governor's office, but I would say he'd have to be up among the roads. Why we attracted, I don't know, probably before air conditioning, it was a good way to get away where nobody would find you. And I suspect that had something to do with it. I'm not quite sure why else.
Well, Tampa had a real history of characters and rogues and thieves and gamblers, and probably the best of them was Charlie Wall. Charlie McKay Wall. He was born about 1880. He was the son of John P. Wall, who was a very distinguished mayor and doctor. So he came from a very distinguished family, but he was definitely the black sheep of the family. And so to appreciate Charlie Wall, you have to appreciate how gambling interests controlled the city of Tampa for the first half of the 20th century. They controlled elections, and the game of Bolita was the very early version of the Florida lottery, only it was illegal. and so Bolita started in Ybor City, and it was illegal, but everyone played. And so Charlie Wall was able to, when the city of Tampa was incorporated for the last time, it had become a city before, and then it went away, and then it was incorporated again, and then it dissolved, and then again. So finally it was incorporated in 1887, and that's where it stands today. And it was divided into 4 wards, one ward being the Latin ward. And Charlie Wall was able to really control elections because he crossed over very easily from the Anglo world to the Latin world. The Latino community knew him, respected him, worked with him. The Anglo world, again, he was from one of the most distinguished families in all of Tampa. He lost his mother at the age of 12, then his father died. He was raised by a stepmother he hated. He shot her with a .22 rifle. He was sent off to reform school. That didn't last. His uncle Likes had to pull him out and try to do something with him, but he just had a life of crime. And yet, while he had a life of crime and with gambling interests, he also moved seamlessly throughout the Anglo community, the Latino community, and with all the great families of Tampa. Charlie Wall was a great character, and he through the first half of the 20th century, he truly did help control elections. And elections in Tampa were wild affairs. There was not a single honest election in the city of Tampa in the first half of the 20th century. They were all crooked, they were all stolen, they all had stuffed ballot boxes, and they, I hope I have an opportunity to go into detail with some of them, because the 1935 mayoral election was the creme de la creme of them all, where the National Guard had to be called in. But the real thing with Charlie Wall is, and finally the gambling got caught up with him, and in 1950 the Kefauver Commission came to Tampa, the old federal courthouse right downtown, and held the famous Kefauver hearings, where they were to uncover the gambling structure and the underworld, the mafia structure in Tampa. And Charlie Wall at that time was in his 70s, and he showed up, and he was the star witness. This was the biggest event in Tampa. The radio stations covered it. People stopped and listened to the live proceedings. And Charlie Wall was absolutely the star witness because of his lifetime in the gambling industry. 5 years later, Charlie Wall was killed in his Ybor City home. And his death never fully resolved as to who did it. It was assumed that it was the underworld. But Charlie Wall really personified the Tampa politics. And Tampa politics was absolutely corrupt and controlled by gambling interests for so many decades. It was so much the norm that people didn't expect anything else. Charlie Wall was the real center of it, and probably one of the most colorful characters in our history.
Ray, so many rogues, so little time.
Let me see. Well, I'm not sure St. Petersburg had anyone to quite match Charlie Wall, at least in the political arena. But we did have our share of rogues, and my favorite is Handsome Jack Taylor. Some of you may be familiar with him. He never served as mayor, but he didn't need to. He came to the city in 1921. He was married to Evelyn DuPont, who was a beautiful heiress, though the DuPont family was so scandalized when she married Handsome Jack that they disowned her. Of course, they never told anybody in St. Petersburg that. They had their matching Stutz Bearcat automobiles and their own Pullman car, and they came into town, and he was working the land boom, competing with Noel Mitchell and the other sand merchants. But he had something that they didn't have. There were a couple of occasions when they needed a little extra money to seal the deal, and he would turn to Evelyn, and she would hike up her flapper dress, and she'd always have a $1,000 bill or a $100 bill in her garter belt. And she'd pull that out, and that was all it took in St. Petersburg in 1923. But he was the creator of many local institutions before he left the city in 1926. He was only in St. Pete for 5 years, but till the bust came. If you visit Stetson University College of Law today, as many of you probably know, that used to be the Roliat Hotel. Roliat Hotel. Roliat is Taylor spelled backwards. Okay? He was not a humble man, but he also created the Pasadena Golf Course, and he got Babe Ruth and Walter Hagen and other people to play golf there to sort of publicize his golf course. But when the creditors came to look for him, when the bust came in 1926, he left town very quickly, and one of his great rivals was a man named Walter Fuller, who wrote a history of St. Petersburg called St. Petersburg and Its People in 1972. And Fuller just despised Handsome Jack Taylor, who was kind of an interloper who came into town. And on the Pasadena Golf Course, Handsome Jack Taylor had an island which he had stocked with monkeys. It was Monkey Island. And he left town so quickly that he didn't worry about the monkeys. So with great fanfare, Walter Fuller got a rowboat and went out to the island to save the monkeys. But many of the monkeys got away, and if you have friends who live in the jungle area near Park Street in St. Petersburg, they probably can tell you that for many years there were troops of monkeys in the dense woods there, and they were all from Monkey Island when Handsome Jack Taylor left in 1926. There's also a local legend that in the early 50s he came back, a man looking like Handsome Jack Taylor, a little older, scruffy looking, and started digging near the walls, obviously looking for the money he'd left behind. But we don't know whether that's a legend or not. But we haven't seen the likes of Handsome Jack Taylor many times in St. Pete.
Thank you. My all-time favorite rogue in Tampa is Frederick Wakenavel, who came to Tampa in the 1880s at a moment when the old Fort Brooke military reservation had been decommissioned. In the area, basically the southern half of downtown Tampa now was the Fort Brooke reservation, and Frederick Wakenavel, he had told people he had escaped from the Tsar's army. He had been a surgeon in the Tsar's army, and he organized a homeless army that took control of Fort Brooke, and they called it Moscow. It was kind of Moscow in the Hillsborough. Among his exploits, he loved opera. He would go to Branch's Opera House until he was barred because he would sing along with the opera stars. He would swim in the Hillsborough River on Sunday mornings with a tea service. He would float on his back like an otter, tea service on his stomach, and he would read the newspaper while having tea, floating and bobbing on. He organized a free love society in Tampa and held a banquet at the Havana restaurant. And sadly, his nefarious career came to an end when a botched abortion went bad, and he was arrested. But even in jail, he was a notorious figure because he had valets bring him food from the finest restaurants. And so Frederick Wakenavel was pure Tampa in so many ways. Ray, why don't you begin? Question 3. If you read the newspapers, and apparently fewer and fewer people do, you might conclude that 2009 is the time of woe and want, and in Dickensian prose, the worst of times. What event or series of events do you think marked St. Petersburg's darkest hour? And maybe more importantly, what lessons should we draw from those struggles of the past?
Well, of course, I'm sure we could.
Oh, you're first, I'm sorry.
I'm sure we could talk about the Great Depression. I'm sure Rick may want to talk about that. There are a lot of amazing things that happened in St. Pete. But for me, in doing research on the city, there's one event that haunts me, and it was a lynching which took place in St. Petersburg in 1914. You don't normally think of a city like St. Petersburg in the same breath as a tradition of lynching, but have been several in the city's history. In 1914, the estimates vary, but as many as 50% of the city's population participated in the lynching, and it was in retribution for the murder of an investor named Edward Sherman from Philadelphia. We'll never know who actually killed Mr. Sherman or who attacked his wife, but there were two African-American men who had worked for them, and they were immediately brought under suspicion. They weren't from St. Petersburg, they were outsiders, and the interesting thing about the lynching is that it didn't follow the normal kind of hysterical, spontaneous mob violence. The lynching was actually ordered by a coroner's jury. The leading citizens of the city decided that they needed to bring someone to justice, a certain kind of justice, and they wanted to convince the investors in Philadelphia and other places that this kind of thing couldn't happen. So this gruesome lynching took place with all of the worst kinds of things that you associate with the Deep South in Mississippi and Alabama, with being burned at the stake and pointed objects being thrust into the body and children being brought to the body and selling parts of the body as souvenirs. And I think there was such a feeling of shame afterwards that in some ways I think it inoculated the city for a number of years, and people realized, at least some people realized what had happened. But it's the kind of thing that I know when I was doing research on the city I didn't fully expect. I knew there was a tradition of Jim Crow and racial prejudice, but nothing quite like an incident like the lynching of John Evans in 1914, and it's a kind of an eerie moment. That's the worst moment for me.
Mayor Iorio.
You know, Tampa, I don't think, had any one instance that was its dark hour. Tampa had a hard time getting started, and it struggled. In fact, right after the Civil War, its population was only about 700, and it continually had yellow fever epidemics that kept its population very, very low. Really, the population of Tampa didn't begin to take off and move from about 700 to about 5,000 until that time period between 1880 and 1890 when the railroad came to Tampa. There was no one defining moment where you'd say this was a terrible time for Tampa. But I do think that there was one public policy issue and one way of conducting business in Tampa politics that is a very negative stain on Tampa's history. As you know, in the first half of the 20th century, blacks could not participate in the party primary. They could not belong to the Democratic Party, but our municipal elections were nonpartisan elections and always have been nonpartisan elections. And so in 1908, the city fathers, led by D.B. McKay, decided to form Tampa's white municipal party, and that in the future, from 1910 going forward, the white municipal party was going to be the primary election for the mayor's office and city council. And so that essentially became the party that you had to belong to. The net effect of that is that blacks could not participate in municipal politics from 1910 all the way, if you can believe this, to 1947. Just an extraordinary length of time where blacks were excluded from municipal politics. And I think that's a real stain on our city's history, that blacks were excluded for that length of time. And in fact, it's why you can look at certain parts of Tampa, and while that's changed dramatically in recent times, you can see the effects of that kind of neglect for having a half century where blacks were not able to participate because of this legal mechanism. And it's part of history that's not easy to unearth either. D.B. McKay was mayor 4 times and later went on to become the county historian. He died in 1960 and very well respected. But you can go through D.B. McKay's history and never see any reference at all to Tampa's white municipal party. It's part of Tampa's history that's hard to get at. But when you do get at it, you look at it and you're ashamed that that was part of our history.
Mayor Baker.
I think I would, well, I know I would agree with Ray that the 1914 lynching was the, what I would call the low point in the character of the city. And certainly the Jim Crow laws, the white primary in St. Petersburg, and all that, which was continued until the Civil Rights era, was a reflection of the low point of the character of the city as well. As far as the kind of the low point of the financial health of the city, obviously it would have to be the real estate collapse in the mid-1920s, followed by the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression. I sometimes say I think St. Petersburg, during the boom, boomed like few cities boomed, and during the crash, crashed like few cities crashed. During the boom period of time was the lot craze, where we were subdividing our city into lots for sale, which were really being purchased as investments, as opposed to being purchased really as real estate. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? And that lot boom continued to go, and so tourists would come and they'd buy lots, and other people would buy lots, and all these lots, and the city spent a lot of money building the infrastructure to support the new subdivisions that had the lots that nobody was living in. And so you were building brick streets out to them, and you're building water systems and sewer systems and bridges and all of those things, and you're floating bonds. So you're floating lots and lots and lots and lots of bonds. And we had a very high, I think our bond per capita was second only to Atlantic City at the time in the country. And so that happened. And the lot prices kept going up every year, up and up and up. So the tax value of your real estate assessed value, which you get your taxes from, kept going up and up and up and up. So then they'd float bonds supported by this new tax value that was going up and up and up and up. Still sounds familiar. And then as Walter Fuller, who Ray mentioned, said, the lots went up and up and up, and then we ran out of suckers, and that's what he said. And so it crashed. And the real estate crash in the mid-1920s, the stock market crash, and during this period of time is when the Vinoy was built, and when the Don Cesar was built, and the Royette was built, and the Jungle Hotel was built, and the Ponce de Leon was built, and the Serena was built, and all these hotels were built around the city during this 20s boom. And then you hit this crash, and the crash was hit hard. The city couldn't pay its bonds. Every bank in the city failed, and you couldn't pay your teachers, and there's a very interesting study that I read about 15 years ago about how we did the refinancing of the bonds and did it with the tax deeds, and Dixie Hollins helped the city do that, get through the 1930s and finally refinance all the bonds in 1937 and get the city moving again. But it was a difficult time in the nation, of course, but St. Petersburg was hit pretty hard during that time.
We have time for one more question before we bring the journalist on. A quick question. We have a lot of young graduate students in the audience. Mayor Baker, who are the unsung heroes that you would like to see studied in St. Petersburg? You know, who are the people the history books in the past left out that you would want to salute?
Gee, that's a hard question. we've read it all. I don't know. Who are the unsung heroes? Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I will give a similar answer to that. I think that there was another time, kind of a low time in our city history, I think, was, I would say, in the late 1970s, after a combination, the suburbanization of America back in the 50s, 60s, 70s really had an impact on our city. We had a tour, like every place else, things started leaving downtown. The residential left downtown to the suburbs, and people got cars after the war so they could drive to the suburbs. So you lost residential, your shopping. You started first at Tyrone Gardens, and then you did Central Plaza, and then you did Tyrone Mall, and the shopping left the downtown, and we lost Web City and a lot of the activity from the shopping in the downtown. And we lost a lot of the business became suburban businesses, and then they'd kind of move out. And a lot of the businesses that came after the war did not come into the downtown. They were, Honeywell and others, E-Systems were developed in the suburbs. And so you lost all that. And that was pretty much true, I think, of a lot of cities around the nation. An additional thing that happened to downtown St. Pete at the time was the transition of tourism. And my belief is that before and after World War II, tourism changed. I think before the war, people came to Florida for the sun and for the sunshine and to be part of that. And then afterwards, the 50s, 60s, 70s, people came from the beach. And so the hotels were then all built on the beaches. And so we lost the business, we lost the residential, we lost the tourism, the hotels. So, and we also lost the tourism industry, which kind of really gutted the downtown. So in the 1970s, late 70s, and the 1980s, and the 1990s, there was the Pinellas Sports Authority formed in the late 70s. The in-town redevelopment plan was put together in 1982. And an awful lot of people, St. Pete's doing great now, but I like to refer to it as the 25-year overnight success, because an awful lot of people over the period of time jumped in at kind of a low ebb period when the city wasn't doing so well, and I think really jumped in the wagon and helped redevelop it and make it what we are today. And I think there are an awful lot of people. I don't know if you could name all of them, but I can think of one fellow from the Chamber's Baseball Committee that went around the country and took videos of other baseball stadiums and was pushing for that effort. There are a lot of folks that worked to bring the city back to where it is.
Mayor Iorio.
Well, two areas. One would be the role of African American women in our civil rights movement, which I think is an area, I think African American women tend not to get the credit for what they've done in the civil rights movement. And so I would ask that future historians and graduate students really look more at the history of the grassroots of the civil rights movement. Look at people like Mary Alice Dorsett and Florine Jones and Ellen P. Green, who just died last year. Ordinary women who took on the job of organizing door to door, registering voters under adverse circumstances, and really systematically, day by day, year by year, made the kind of changes that opened up the franchise to everyone. And then there's another person who I think deserves a little bit more credit in Tampa, Hillsborough history. As I mentioned before, our elections were an abomination. And all of them were corrupt, and the ballot boxes were stuffed, and the poll tax, people paid the poll taxes for thousands of voters and then voted for them. It was routine to have the ballot boxes stuffed. And all with the same markings. It was obvious. There was nothing, no one tried to hide it. It was all very obvious. And the supervisor of registration, who was elected in 1932, was John Deacle. He served from 1932 until 1969. So he served from FDR to LBJ, if you can believe it. Now, it was not the same role as the supervisor of elections is today, but it was somewhat similar. It was a supervisor of registration. It had different powers than the supervisor of elections has today, but generally he was responsible for the conduct of elections, although there was also an election board. But you have to really give this man credit, because in a county that had the worst elections in the country, and they were so corrupt. He was a man of integrity. He ushered in the voting lever machine in 1937, and Hillsborough County ended up with being the first county in the state to utilize the lever machine, which stopped the ballot box stuffing. He's the one who fought for a permanent registration system, because prior to his tenure, you registered for each election, and the rolls were just all wrong and all corrupt, and the whole thing was a mess. And so in a very steady fashion, he just kept working towards better and more honest elections. He was not part of the gambling syndicate. He was not part of the corrupt atmosphere. He served with distinction, and he's really not in the history books. And I think he deserves some credit for trying to bring about honesty during an era of dishonesty.
Thank you.
Well, just briefly, so many unsung heroes. I'd like to mention just two. One is a contemporary figure, some of you know, Bob Devin Jones, who is one of my heroes. He's an African-American who moved here 10 years ago from Los Angeles and created this studio at 620, has created a space for interracial dialogue, for the arts, for anything that needs to be done. And I hope that future historians will include him in the history of the city, because I think he's had an enormous impact on the city over the last decade and will continue to. The other person, if I can take a moment of privilege, to me is John Hope Franklin. The horrible story that I told you a few minutes ago, in some ways I think there's a countervailing reality that John Hope Franklin, perhaps the greatest intellectual, certainly the greatest black intellectual of our time, man who created African American history, had a life like no other, chose St. Petersburg as his second home. Came to the city for a month every year, beginning in 1982, loved the city, worked tirelessly, and I mean, he's only here for a month, but it's amazing what he was able to do, the kind of things that he inspired, and I always took it as a great testament of faith in the new St. Petersburg and kind of reclaiming its best impulses, that he grew to love the city, a city that had a horrific Jim Crow past, as most other southern cities did. So I hope that when the later volumes of the city's history are written, that there'll be some mention of John Hope, because I think we all owe him a huge debt, and as everyone else is, I'm very sad that he passed this year at the age of 94, but what a life he had, and St. Petersburg is really in his debt.
Well, we're now going to bring on the heavyweights to ask some tough questions. It's our honor to have three participating journalists tonight: Ernest Hooper of the St. Pete Times, Creative Loafing's Wayne Garcia, and Patrick Mantega of La Gaceta. So let's, thank you so much. Let's begin with Ernest Hooper of the St. Petersburg Times.
Well, we talked about the rivalries between the two cities. Tell me about the historical aspects of that rivalry. What things have happened in each city's history that have contributed to the disdain between the two cities that in some ways still exists today?
Oh, it does not.
Mayor Iorio.
Oh, I love St. Petersburg. I can't wait to annex it.
I'm not going to say anything about the not swallowing things. I'm just going to be quiet about that.
I should interject, by the way, that Mayor Iorio did want to apologize, Mayor Baker, that you probably had difficulty finding some early bird specials in Tampa this evening.
I think he's trying to get me going.
Yeah, he is. He is. Ernest, I don't have a good answer for that, because since 6 years I've been mayor, and I just don't think there's been a rivalry in 6 years. And while there probably has been in previous decades, I just haven't had that between us. And Mayor Baker and I have worked very closely together. And I think that the region has come together as a region and has grown up a lot. Why there have been rivalries in the past, who knows? It's just probably just petty politics is all I can think about. But the region has changed, and people understand that every city in this region has to thrive in order for the region to do well. We're all linked together. We're linked together economically and with our academic institutions and with transportation, and our push for light rail exemplifies that. The only way we're going to get light rails if we all work together as a region. And so it's very, very important that we think that way.
Ernest, if she's not going to answer the question, I'm not going to either. And that's all I got to say.
That's a good one.
You know,
I guess I should say something. Historically, there's a lot of reasons. It goes all the way back to the plant railroad, but I do think that we're far past that. I think we meet on a regular basis. We share ideas and share thoughts, and I think that's the way it should be.
I just
Mayor
like.
Arsenault is not running for office.
Yes.
Well, I do think the cities use each other as a frame of reference, and it's probably natural, they're so close. But I was struck by something. I brought not because I needed anything to eat, but I brought the Skyway Jacks menu with me. Why, I don't know, but this is, of course, a hallowed St. Petersburg institution, kind of the greasy spoon of the city that we all love, but Jack Thomas was the founder of Skyway Jacks, but I only learned, for the first time in years, I actually read the historical part of the menu, and I realized that Jack Thomas was actually a mechanical engineer with Tampa Electric and spent most of his life in Tampa. So he was a transplanted Tampan. Can I say that? That sounds weird, but anyway, that here's this institution that we're very proud of, like the other kind of local eateries that we think are so quintessentially St. Pete, but actually this was founded by somebody from Tampa, and I think you discover that a lot of people have ties on both sides of the bay, and that it really, that the rivalry has been way overplayed as a historical reality, and I think it's you know, obviously there's going to be some competition with cities so close, but compared to when I lived in Minneapolis, I thought Minneapolis and St. Paul was a much testier relationship than ours, certainly.
The golden age of the rivalry had to be the 1950s. I mean, where the new airport would be located, where the first downstate four-year public university would be located, the routing of US 19, the quest to secure the first UHF television station, WFLA, the rivalry, and then you had the rivalry between the newspapers. It makes for great reading. It really does.
And I should say, now that we have Gary in St. Petersburg, the rivalry's over, right? We won.
Like the Colossus, I stride Tampa Bay. Wayne Garcia, the irascible and irreverent political columnist for Creative Loafing. Wayne, tell us about your column.
You don't want to hear that name. It's not in mixed company. We've been talking a lot about interesting people and figures of history, so I thought I would switch gears a little bit and ask you which now destroyed or defunct historical building do you wish you had back in your city, and why?
Yes, excellent.
Well, Wayne, that one I think is easy for the city of Tampa, and it's the Hillsborough County Courthouse downtown. That was a huge mistake. It was the architect was the same as the one of Plant Hall. It was beautiful. It was right in the middle of downtown. It was surrounded by a beautiful garden, and it was destroyed in 1949 so they could build that beautiful county courthouse they have now, that monstrosity on there. I mean, you know, just an architectural zero. And if that had been kept, our downtown today would have an entirely different character to it. Because we would have had the old city hall, and then across the street would have been the old county courthouse with a very interesting architectural style and beautiful gardens around it. And I think it would have changed the whole character of our downtown if only that building had been saved. Linda Salcena was born too late.
Bravo. Mayor Baker.
I think fortunately a lot have been saved. The Vinoy, the Don Cesar, the Detroit Hotel, Snell Arcade, the old post office. I think a lot. I think one of the fortunate things we have is that we have saved a lot of our buildings, our historic ones. And in the Midtown area, over the course past several years, we made a concerted effort to save and rebuild the old Jordan School, the old Manhattan Casino, the old Seaboard Railroad Station, the Old Mercy Hospital. So I think the city historically has done a pretty good job of saving a lot of the old buildings, but not a perfect job. And probably if I had to name one, I'd say the Florida Theater, the old gorgeous theater that was in downtown St. Petersburg that you sure would like to have back.
Well, I think that's right, that we've had some success in saving historic buildings, largely, I think, thanks to an incredibly dedicated group of historic preservationists in the city, led by St. Pete Preservation Incorporated, some people who have just made amazing sacrifices to try to save buildings. Many of you may remember when Bay Plaza had its redevelopment plan to sort of turn downtown into a shopping mall. And I've never forgotten Lyman Warren, who was a very well-known local doctor. I think his son Kai is in the audience tonight. And Dr. Warren got up to testify, and we were discussing how we could save the downtown from Bay Plaza. And he talked about a trip he'd taken to Copenhagen a couple of years before, and he noticed the extraordinary range of beautiful historic buildings that they've been able to save in Copenhagen, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And he said, how were you able to save these beautiful buildings? And without missing a beat, the tour guide said, we never had enough money to tear them down. And I think therein lies the dilemma we've been facing in recent years, that with the boom in downtown St. Petersburg, which in many respects has been wonderful, we face some difficult prospects in terms of choices about historic buildings, and we have so many to protect, and I hope we won't ever have a Florida Theater, a building of that magnitude, torn down. The Sereno still, every time I hear that, I just sort of bristle. But in some ways, I think it led to the undoing of Bay Plaza and saved many, many historical buildings. So we sacrificed that one, but so many wonderful ones. And some of us are hoping that the old casino building at the end of the pier will be brought back, and that'll be a great triumph for historic preservation and the history of the city if we can do that.
Let me follow up briefly on this topic, because we're in this stunning building. But what building in Tampa or St. Petersburg do you think best speaks to the vitality, the spirit of the city? Mayor Baker. Or in other words, what's your favorite building and why?
Oh, my favorite building is easy, the Vinoy Hotel. It is a hotel that was closed for, 17 years or something like that. And there's a book on the history of the Vinoy Hotel, and it's amazing how many near-death experiences it went through with people that were going to come in and tear it down for this and tear it down for that. And it didn't get redeveloped until 1990, and I can remember walking through the hotel when the windows were all gone and there were birds flying through it and living in it, and it was quite an endeavor for Fred Guest to come in and with his partners to come in and redevelop that hotel. I think they spent $100 million on it, and they didn't own it for a long time, but it certainly was a great gift to the city of St. Petersburg.
You have to say the Plant Hall, because it's the iconic symbol of Tampa, and it's Tampa, and it's the most beautiful building. So that is my favorite. But also the federal courthouse downtown, built in 1904, beautiful building, both inside and out. And then all of the clubs, the Italian club, the Cuban club, Centro Historiano, all of these clubs are beautiful architecturally, and all need to be preserved because they really speak to the immigrant fabric of the city of Tampa. Very important part of our history, each of these buildings.
I would pick two. The first would be the historic Snell House, which houses the Florida Studies program, which is littered with Gary's stuff and my stuff. So we don't deserve such a beautiful house, but we're staying there. It's wonderful. If you over in St. Pete, come see us. It's a beautiful turn of the century house. But my favorite, and this may say something about the peculiarities of St. Petersburg or the peculiarities of me, is the Little St. Mary's public restroom. That is my favorite building. It's at the approach to the pier. It was designed by Henry Taylor, the same architect who designed the Vinoy and St. Mary's Church. And there's a probably apocryphal story that when he designed St. Mary's Church, the diocese stiffed him a little bit on the fee. He also had the contract to do the public restroom. You know, don't get mad, get even. So he designed the public restroom. It's almost a perfect replica of St. Mary's Church, and it's an absolute architectural jewel, and probably the most versatile building in the city for more reasons than one. That's my favorite.
Remember the line from the man who shot Liberty Valance, when myth becomes fact, print the myth. Finally, we have Patrick Manteiga, the publisher of America's only trilingual newspaper, third generation owner of the paper, and you have to root for the underdog in this time of newspapers. So, Patrick Manteiga.
Thank you very much. Excuse my hoarseness. I was at a NASCAR race over the weekend and lost my voice. What local black or Hispanic individual had the greatest impact on your city?
I didn't hear that, Patrick.
What local black or Hispanic figure had the greatest impact upon your city?
Boy, there's so many. So many. Where do I begin? On the African American side, well, there's so many. I would say one, though, who has always been one of a friend and someone who I think has had a great impact historically, was Bob Saunders. Because Bob Saunders took over the role of the NAACP and in voter registration after Harry T. Moore, thank you, Harry and Harriet T. Moore were killed in their Christmas Eve bombing of their home. And so you can imagine there weren't a lot of takers, you know, who would like to head up the NAACP statewide voter registration drive. And Bob Saunders agreed to do that. And really someone who I think is very significant in Tampa's history as well as statewide. Hispanic, I mean, you have so many because our history here in Tampa, in Ybor City, you know, you had this great mixture of Italians and Cubans and Spaniards all coming together here. By the way, we now have Swedes because IKEA opened today.
You betcha.
A new immigrant mix. And so it's hard for me to pick out one that I would say has had such impact because really there are dozens and dozens of major Hispanic leaders who helped shape the city of Tampa and were leaders in Ybor City. Your father was one. I mean, your father was a great leader, and really, Patrick, think about it, your newspaper helps tell the story of the city of Tampa. In fact, it may be here after the dailies are gone. And it may tell, I don't want the dailies to be gone, but if the dailies go, I think that the weeklies may end up being one of the only sources of news that we end up with in the printed format. But, you know, I think people like your father, people like E.J. Salsinas, Ybor, people like, well, there are just so many who helped shape the character of our city and came to this country with nothing and ended up being so rich in friendships and heritage and culture and in community. Tampa is a marvelous city, and one of the things that makes it just so great is its early melting pot status. And we had Afro-Cubans and whites working side by side in cigar factories. We were an integrated southern city before any other southern city in the United States was integrated, because we had blacks and whites working side by side in the cigar factories in Ybor City, and an integrated community in Ybor City. And so many cities have come to diversity late in the game, but Tampa has been a diverse city from its very, very beginnings, and that's something we're really proud of.
I probably, if I'm going to look for a person, I'm probably going to go to the civil rights era, and I think the civil rights movement in St. Petersburg now, I shouldn't even talk about it in front of Ray because he's the national expert on it, but I think that the civil rights era in St. Petersburg in many ways mirrored the civil rights era of the rest of the South. And so you had a lot of people that had to step forward and lead at that time. And I think of, I'll just name a few. I think of Chester James Sr., who took what was Methodist Town in St. Petersburg and just flat demanded that the conditions of that part of our community be changed, and to the point that that when the city council agreed to build what became Jamestown, named after Chester James, at the city council meeting when it was being passed, Mayor Randy Wenning asked Chester James Sr. to come forward up to the council podium and bang the gavel on the vote because he was forever called the mayor of Methodist Town. And so that was a great moment, I think, in our city. The civil rights era with the movie theater stand-ins and the drug counter sit-ins and the sanitation strike and all of the civil rights eras. You had people like Sanderlin, who was just a great leader and legal mind and judge and role model, and our Joe Savage, who was just one of the sanitation folks that just decided to step forward and take a leadership role in that and just make a difference in our community. And Chester James Jr. was a leader in the movie theater stand-ins and the sit-ins. Very difficult times, and I had the honor of getting to know Chester James Jr. and his wife well, and have had many conversations with them talking about that period of time. And when you read about it in history, it's one thing, but when you talk to somebody that lived through it from the perspective of people that were fighting for their rights, and you listen to her talk about the fear that people had when they were standing out. We know now how it turned out. They didn't know how it was going to turn out back then. They didn't know which way it was going to go. They didn't know whether they were in fear for their life, and they were in fear for what they were doing. So I have great respect for the leaders that we had in the civil rights movement. I will tell you, I also have a personal bias, that I think in 20 years or 25 years or 30 years from now, when they talk about one of the leading African-American people in our community, they're going to name Goliath Davis as that. He was kind of the second wave of African-American police officers to come into a Southern police department, and all that goes with that, and some of the difficulties he encountered along the way to become the first African-American police chief in the city, with all the difficulties that go along with that. And then he's been deputy mayor for the last 8 years and has absolutely transformed, or helped to transform, a part of our city. So in 25 years from now, when you ask me that question, he'll be the one I name.
I'd just like to mention two other names. Rick has mentioned most of the important figures, but a husband and wife team, Ralph and Bet Wimbish. They were the heart and soul of the NAACP in St. Petersburg in the 1950s and 60s. They, more than anyone else, were responsible for the desegregation of spring training facilities, which sort of, I think, accelerated the pace of the civil rights movement in the Tampa Bay area in 1961. Bet Wimbish, who's still alive, Ralph is gone, and Bet is in very poor health, but she was the first black elected to the city council in St. Petersburg and was elected vice mayor in 1969, and an amazing woman, an attorney. Whenever anything needed to be done, the Wimbishes were there, and they never sought any credit. Just an amazing team, and we owe them a lot. And I think when the civil rights history of the city is written, their names will be right at the top of the list. Thank you.
Just to reflect on Patrick Mantega's father, Roland Mantega, I've always thought if you wanted to understand Roland Mantega, if you had been at his funeral, two of his pallbearers included the founder of all the girly clubs, the nude bars on Dale Mabry was there, but also Lawton Childs, the governor of Florida. That tells you a lot. Pam Iorio's father, John Iorio, is one of the greatest figures I've ever known. I mean, John Iorio was a great man. In closing, for those in the audience or watching at home who would like to comment or continue this conversation, the Florida Humanities Council has created a blog site. John Wilson, where's John? Wave your hand, John. John Wilson, former St. Pete Times journalist, now moving on to a much more challenging career as a Florida Studies Program graduate student. John is the webmaster, and there will be flyers on the way out, but the website is www.flahum.org/connect. As I say, flyers on the way out. And for over 3 decades, the Florida Humanities Council has left a rich and vibrant legacy in making this a better state and helping Floridians appreciate history and culture. Tonight is merely one example. Join me in saluting the Florida Humanities Council. All of us care deeply about the future of the state of Florida and wonder what influence Tampa Bay leaders will play in the future. What office will our most beloved political figures run for? But enough about Governor Charlie Crist. Tonight is to honor Mayors Baker and Iorio. But while on the topic, would either of you care to make an important announcement tonight?
You go first.
Yeah, I will. I'll announce that I believe I am the only registered voter in the city of St. Petersburg that you know for certain will not be mayor next January. And Ernest, that is all I got to say.
Oh. No good announcement, Gary, sorry. Are we going to have closing statements, though?
Yes, please.
Okay. Then I'd like to announce how important I think history is, because it is. And I so enjoyed tonight with my friend Rick Baker, and Rick and I have become good friends over the past 6 years and have enjoyed working on some joint projects together and sharing thoughts. And I think we both agree that being mayor is the kind of position where you can really get things done, and we've both really enjoyed it a lot. But I'm always very aware every day that I go to work that we make history every day. And I'm always aware that my actions and those of council and us collectively in the city, we're helping to shape the city. We're deciding where cultural institutions go. We're deciding about green space. We're making decisions about transportation in the future. And so my love of history has really informed me about my current position and how important it is to make the right decisions for the long term, because you are making history every day. And I've enjoyed learning about my city's history. There's no greater place in the United States than Tampa. Its history is fascinating, but its future is even greater. And so I thank the Florida Humanities Council for this opportunity. And Rick, it's always great being with you. And I've enjoyed tonight very much.
You know, there are probably only, I think, about 5 cities with strong mayor form of government in Florida, maybe 6, 5 or 6. And so it can be a job that you don't really have many people you can relate to when you're running into issues and challenges. And so it's been fun for us to get to know each other and to share some of the issues that really it's hard to get somebody else to give you the same perspective on. So I thank you, Pam, and I've enjoyed this. I enjoyed the last one we did. This has been terrific. I agree completely with what the mayor just said. I think that one of my favorite characters in history is Winston Churchill. And he used to tell his generals that the further backward you can look, the further forward you can see. And I believe in that. I believe in it completely. And I, from our city's perspective, when I studied and wrote about the inordinate effort it took to assemble the waterfront parkland that we have in the 4 miles of downtown St. Petersburg, and you see what an asset it is for the community, and you understand that history, it makes you very jealous in protecting it. And when you understand how difficult it was to get the railroad here, you understand, but you also understand what happened after it came, then it makes you understand the importance of transportation systems that the mayor has been such a great leader on, and making sure that people can get in and out and back and forth. It provides the lifeblood for your city to be able to grow. So you have to constantly looking back. You know, one thing I've been surprised on as mayor is because you are part of the current history of the city, but I've learned even more about the past history of the city since I became mayor. I thought I knew it pretty well, and I did know it pretty well, but I've learned an awful lot of it as we go. And I like the mayor feels about her town, I feel that way about my town. We talk about the difficult and challenging times that we are facing as a country. I have no worries about the city of St. Petersburg. I think we have developed a quality of life that is hard to match anywhere in the world, and that we will work our way through the current national economic difficulties, and at the end of it, we will thrive like very few cities will. So, being mayor of the city has been the greatest honor I've ever been given in my life, and I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to talk about it here tonight. Thank you.
Ray, some final reflections?
Well, I was just thinking, despite all the challenges that we face, what an encouraging moment this is to have 2 mayors of major cities next to each other who have such an appreciation for history. What a great advertisement for being a history major, right? Even though I don't think Rick was a history major, but he's found his true belief late in life. And frankly, to have someone in the White House who appreciates history and thinks historically, it just makes me feel better about our chances of really coming out of the tough times with a better sense of ourselves and a greater appreciation for the things that really matter. So I think we're just so fortunate to have these 2 people who have this longer view. I think it can't be overestimated, as you've seen tonight. So I think we owe them a great debt that they have this interest and that we were able to have them in positions of leadership. Thank you.
In conclusion, I don't think you will ever see this again. I cannot imagine in the future a mayor of St. Petersburg and a mayor of Tampa sharing such a love of history and a knowledge of their city's past. And should they be running for higher office, if I were a journalist, this is the tape I would come to. We know their stance on foreclosures and bicycle paths and appointments. We can now understand their outlook on the human condition and in the best and the worst moments in their city's history. So this is a rare moment for us to appreciate. Thank you for coming. This has been a great evening.